Please be warned. Inspired by a true story, deals with crimes that may contain adult themes and violence, and is intended for a mature audience.
March 1st, 1949. Police are notified by surrounding neighbors that a local woman and her 2-year-old daughter are missing, which leads to a basement full of horrors and the arrests of 2 very despicable people. The couple at the heart of these horrors are later revisited in not 1 but 2 movie interpretations of these events, which go in vastly different directions. Love is not always exciting and new. Sometimes it's just monstrous. And yes, the Honeymoon Killers and Lonely Hearts were both inspired by true stories. Welcome to True Crime for Cinephiles. This is inspired by a true story podcast devoted to keeping artists honest. And if you've never listened to our podcast before, first we detail the actual crimes, then after that we'll discuss those facts as well as the film on its own and how much of that was true versus how much was Hollywood magic. Remember, you can always share this podcast with your friends, review us on the app you're listening to right now, and that would be greatly appreciated. If you want to do it right now, we'll wait. That's fine. I'm Aaron Peterson, an accredited film critic for The Hollywood Outsider podcast and website at thehollywoodoutsiders.com. Joining me today are my fellow film critics and true crime devotees, John Davenport.
Hey, buddy.
Amanda Sink.
Hello, hello.
And how about dating in the 40s, huh? It was tough.
It's kind of like dating today.
I was going to say neither of them seem great.
Yeah.
Well, letters took a lot longer, so you had a lot of time to plan and plot. Now it's just, I swipe right, swipe left. Is that how it works now? Everybody just does it through Tinder and Grindr and everything else, right?
Why do you always mention Grindr is what I'm curious about.
And it's always the second one. Like he's trying to hide it.
It's not hiding it if I mention it, right? I'm just mentioning it. I'm
not
judging it. You do what you gotta do. John? Why are you getting so offended by it?
I'm not getting offended. I'm
Sounds
just
like
pointing
you're
out the obvious little missteps we're having in this cover of yours.
I haven't dated in 20 years. I don't know what they use. So
it sucks. I don't suggest it and I don't participate. How about that?
Well, then how do you know if it sucks if you don't participate?
Because I participated for all of 7 months and I'm like, this is bullshit. I'm out.
Man, I don't know if you heard that, but that's the sound of what a bitter Betty sounded like. I believe they called it that in the 40s. It's just a little
bit. That's
bit.
Somebody who's
who
really cares about their mental health.
It can sound like that on the surface, but the reality is dating nowadays is quite tragic.
Yeah, it's really a bunch of narcissists or people who are attention seekers just looking to destroy other people's lives for shits and giggles of it all.
You're right. That doesn't sound like a bitter Betty
I
at
don't
all.
know. It's that dark.
So stupidly
I think it's just
dramatic.
more like people are a little more selfish and aren't really concerned with how things make others feel, and everything's a little loosey-goosey.
You sounded
dreadful.
Yeah, it sounded like you just went through a trip down the dark web. Maybe you're surfing the wrong app. Maybe you should try Grindr.
Maybe I should. I mean, I get certain attention from certain people. I probably should participate in that. That might be fun.
You might want to look at your selection process, number 1. That's what I would go with.
Your selection process.
As well as how this all happened back in the 40s. This is a crazy situation, I would say, because in this case, we're going to talk about the details of the case first, then we'll talk about the movies. But there are 2 movies that are distinctly different in regards to this case. One is actually called Lonely Hearts and is actually written and directed by the grandson of the cop who investigated the crimes and somehow gets a lot wrong. I'm just saying, there's a lot wrong. And the other one is a very disturbing movie that's kind of a cult classic in many respects. Francois Truffaut says it's his favorite American film. He's a very noted critic. He famously interviewed Alfred Hitchcock at one time. That's surprising to me once you've seen it, but it's also closer to the facts. So it's kind of wild to me how, well, neither one of these movies actually got them exactly right, but the older movie's actually closer than the newer one. Written by the grandson of the guy who investigated it. It's interesting to me.
That is interesting, but one of the things we can talk about when we get there is that I don't know if these movies are that different. The only real difference is like you see more of the investigation on the second one versus the first one.
Okay, it's completely different, but we'll hold that till we get there.
Maybe I watched the wrong movie twice then.
Okay, so we're going to move into the discussion of the true crime, and then we'll come back and talk about those details, as well as the movies and how true or true not. True not? Oh.
Untrue, false.
There you go.
Not correct.
Possibly.
Those would all be acceptable.
Thank you.
Synonyms.
I appreciate that. Words are not my specialty, so get ready for a lot of them. As of this recording, The Honeymoon Killers is streaming on Max, and Lonely Hearts is available on Fandango at home, but that's always subject to change. New episodes are released every 2 weeks and can be found wherever you listen to podcasts or at thehollywoodoutsider.com. You can also hear episodes early by supporting the show at patreon.com/thehollywoodoutsider. Now, film and true crime fans alike are always debating how true the true crime is. Dating is tough. Murder is tougher. This is the true story behind both The Honeymoon Killers and Lonely Hearts. Raymond Martinez Fernandez was born on December 17th, 1914 in the territory of Hawaii. You know, because it wasn't a state yet. Raymond Fernandez was from a Spanish family, and they moved to Connecticut when Raymond was young. At 16, Fernandez was imprisoned for 2 months for stealing chickens. The family soon moved to Gibraltar, where Raymond worked on a farm and his father became a local mayor. Raymond led an interesting life, marrying, fathering 4 children, and then leaving them all to continue on his life's pursuits. He served in the military during World War I, gathering intelligence, but when he returned, he boarded a ship to the U.S., where he had a tragic accident that resulted in multiple skull fractures. Allegedly, this accident altered his mind, molding him into an impulsive sex addict. Shortly after arriving in the U.S., Raymond was again jailed for thievery, and while imprisoned, Raymond converted to voodoo and black magic, and he believed that this dojo mojo witchery caused women to impulsively fall in love with him, to come under his spell, if you will. Same, Raymond. Same. In 1946, Raymond moved to New York City and took up with a dating club known as the Mother Deneni's Friendly Club, where he would write to lonely women and convince them to go on dates with him. Raymond began a very complex con of sorts. He would woo women by sheer charm and a bad toupee. And then when he had the opportunity, he would loot their accounts and leave them. One woman, Lucilla Thompson, he took to Spain, and shortly she turned up dead. The death was ruled as a heart attack triggered by gastroenteritis. Sounds like a broken heart to me. Martha Jewel Seabrook was born on May 6, 1920 in Milton, Florida. Martha apparently suffered from a glandular disorder, and therefore was overweight for most of her life. And as a child, she was bullied quite frequently. Again, same Martha, same. She entered puberty quite early and claimed to be very developed sexually by 9 years old. When Martha alerted her mother that her brother had raped her, her mother allegedly beat her with a hairbrush. According to Martha, her upbringing was fraught with turmoil. She ran away but returned and eventually found her vocation in nursing. She graduated in 1942, yet could not find work, which Martha attributed to her weight. She did eventually find work in a funeral home, prepping the bodies for burial. But eventually she decided to try the West Coast for a time and headed to California, where she found work as a nurse. Martha also began having random sexual encounters to fulfill her self-esteem issues. This led to an eventual pregnancy with a man who refused to marry Martha and allegedly committed suicide shortly after. Pregnant, alone, and depressed, Martha moved back to Florida, where she lied and told everyone that the father was a fallen serviceman. Martha eventually married truck driver Albert Beck. This was short-lived, though. About 6 months, but it left Martha Beck, now pregnant and alone with her second child. Martha was unlucky in love, and the very definition of a lonely heart. She became absorbed in fantasy and romance novels, forever looking for that one man to whisk her away from it all. In 1946, Martha began working at the Pensacola Hospital for Children. And in 1947, an ad for Beck was placed, to which Raymond Fernandez responded. His intention was, of course, to con her. But Martha had misrepresented herself and her place in society. So after a weekend was spent wooing, Raymond headed back to New York, alone. In hindsight, it was almost amusing that Raymond was bothered by her misrepresenting her weight and wealth, while he consistently lied to everyone about his fortunes. Martha mailed several letters to Raymond, and he disregarded her until she threatened to kill herself, which he then invited Martha to visit him in New York. Her determination and desire to care for him eventually won Raymond over, and he confessed his lonely heart scam to Martha. It seemed he thought this would deter her. Surprisingly, it did not. In fact, she decided to join Raymond, whether he liked it or not, on these escapades and would pose as his sister to help. They were a regular Bonnie and Clyde. Only creepier. Martha was fired from her job for scandalous behavior. That's a quote. And she sent her children away once it was obvious Raymond had no interest in kids. Martha was all in on Raymond. This duo began soliciting lonely women in order to con them out of their small fortunes. Raymond would write them, woo them, and then he would romance them until it was time to marry, and then Martha would join the festivities. They would then later rob the women, and Raymond would leave them shortly after. Martha insisted he did not sleep with the women, though, that he remained devoted to her. And that kept up for some time, or Martha would remain in the lie that Raymond was somehow still being faithful. Whichever. Over the course of the next year or so, the women that were conned, beaten, and possibly murdered crossed over into double digits. The trail of broken hearts and bodies was long, and they were just getting started. Things escalated when Raymond romanced Myrtle Young from Arkansas. They married on August 14, 1948 in Chicago, where they stayed in a modest rooming house. Young and Fernandez fought a few days later, seemingly due to Raymond's refusal to engage in his marital duties. And Martha and Raymond stole $4,000 from Myrtle, while also loading her up on sleeping pills and placing her on a bus back to her home. Myrtle Young would not make it to Arkansas. She suffered a brain hemorrhage on that trip and died. The next victim was Janet Fay in Albany, New York in 1949. Again, Raymond wooed Janet, and he and Martha arrived shortly after New Year's. Immediately, they began working Janet for money, withdrawing several $1,000s over several days. Janet became increasingly curious about Raymond's childhood and asked Martha repeatedly about it, which Martha would then refuse to answer. There are conflicting stories as to what happened next, but it appears that Martha became enraged with either the emotional or physical relationship occurring between Janet and Raymond. This is either due to an argument with Janet or jealousy, as Martha famously stated at her trial that, quote, "I was just burning up with jealousy and anger." And then Martha took a hammer and clubbed Janet Fay in the head. As she was not yet dead, Raymond finished her life by strangling Janet with a scarf. And this is what brought Detective Elmer Robinson onto the case, where there was no longer a body, and the area had been cleaned. But there was, suspiciously, an enormous amount of blood under the floorboards below. After this murder, with Janet's children looking into her disappearance, Martha and Raymond fled to their next victim in Delphine Downing, Grand Rapids, Michigan. Delphine also had a 2-year-old little girl. This time, Raymond immediately began a sexual relationship with Delphine, which again enraged Martha. After quietly robbing yet another victim, Martha and Raymond gave Delphine several sleeping pills. Once she fell asleep, she unexpectedly gained consciousness, so they wrapped a sheet around her head and shot her with a revolver. Delphine's daughter witnessed this dramatic event and proceeded to cry incessantly. This crying continued for 2 days as Fernandez and Beck debated the child's fate. They felt they could not risk leaving the child anywhere, and they were not quite ready to move on. Ultimately, Martha filled up a bathtub, forced the little 2-year-old girl in it, and drowned her. They murdered a child just to shut her up. Then, they took both bodies into the basement and buried them under a fresh patch of concrete. Shortly after, a pair of concerned neighbors arrived looking for Downing and her daughter, and they did not like the excuse Martha and Raymond offered, so they called the police. The police arrived and quickly discovered the bodies. Martha and Raymond confessed within hours to their crimes. What followed was a collection of the usual. The press was in a frenzy. Martha and Raymond were very quickly named the Lonely Hearts Killers, and they seemed to revel in it. Raymond had held over 20 possessions for missing women from across the country, and he seemed to gloat that he had murdered even more. The media reported on their sexual deviancy, and when Martha and Raymond locked eyes in court, Martha forced herself free and kissed Raymond, screaming, quote, "I do love him, and I always will." Aww. Martha was a particular villain for the media. Her blind love for Raymond, her sexuality was fodder, and her weight was ridiculed by major outlets. They were so classy back then. And it did get to Martha, proclaiming in a letter at one point, as reported by Mark Gatto for CrimeLibrary.org, quote, "I'm still a human, feeling every blow inside, even though I have the ability to hide my feelings and laugh. But that doesn't say my heart isn't breaking from the insults and humiliation of being talked about as I am." Martha and Raymond proclaimed their love until their execution on March 8th, 1951. Raymond's last words were written in his cell, quote, "I want to shout it out, I love Martha. What do the public know about love?" Martha also stated, "My story is a love story, but only those tortured by love can know what I mean. I am not unfeeling, stupid, or moronic. I am a woman who had a great love and always will have it. Imprisonment in the death house has only strengthened my feeling for Raymond." Someone wiser than myself once said, "Love is the absence of judgment." And think about that. Just contemplate all the judgment we've all done listening to this one episode. I feel it's safe to say that all of us are in clear judgment of Raymond Fernandez and Martha Beck. They are monsters. They're murderers. They spent their lives manipulating lonely women who simply wanted to love someone and someone to love them. To fulfill that same desire most of us have, the aching to be treated how we deserve and loved unconditionally. They would take this longing and torture it, twist it, violate it. It's not enough to rob someone of their belongings, but their dignity is on a whole other level. Then, if they weren't quite satisfied with that humiliation, they murdered her. And yet Raymond and Martha loved each other until their dying day, which coincided on March 8, 1951. Much like they believed their hearts and lives were linked, so were their deaths. And each had no condemnation for the other, no judgment. Almost in a maniacal sense, they had that compulsive, devoted love so many of us are forever searching for. If we've learned anything from Martha and Raymond, it's that being single really isn't that bad after all.
I don't know. He had somebody willing to kill for him. He has a personal hitman.
There's ride or die, and there's like ride and will kill. Like there's a whole new level.
You guys are taking the Salma Hayek defense in this? Is that what we're doing?
We both know such an appealing character comparatively.
Oh my God. All right. Well, before we move into the movies of it all, so you're saying you guys understand at least there's a real love there? I mean, you get why.
Oh, no.
Okay. I just feel like there's a little bit of, we're good with this. I mean, it's love, bad things. They're bad. People do bad things. They're in love.
So there's definitely a problem here. It's just a perfect storm of like problems that turn into this wild animal that kills freely.
It is a wild love story, though.
It is a wild love story.
Like just to take, like if you were to take, honestly, the murder of the little girl out of it at the very least.
Yeah, that's very sad.
You take that part out, it's like a Bonnie and Clyde story.
I don't think it's Bonnie and Clyde. Bonnie and Clyde were just greedy. They were just robbing banks, right? They weren't doing this. There's a level of depravity to not only manipulating someone's feelings, but also their bank account, but also their lives. I mean, it's just like
okay, fine. They were heartbreakers.
They were
better
worse.
Comparison?
They were sure, but they were worse. In my mind,
they were.
I can't think of much worse than con artists are they can be just as bad as murderers for a lot of people because they destroy their livelihoods, their belief in other people and the system and themselves. I mean, they can really strip away one's life without killing them in that respect. So, but they're doing all of it. Like they're stripping away their dignity. They're playing off their emotions and then they're killing them after they rob them. It's just like, at what point did they ever just go, we did too much? I mean, obviously not. But at some point, like even someone with a shred of dignity, like Martha pretends
they don't have a line.
No line. There's no line. I agree with you.
The lady gave up her kids.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I think the symbol of like, okay, there's a level of psychosis and obsession here. This was not just about love, let's be a family, because otherwise she could have taken her children with her. She was like, if I want to be with him, I need to leave these little shits behind and go take out a bunch of people. Like a professional hit woman.
They could be lovely kids. We don't know.
Well,
they probably are. I'm speaking as though I am Martha.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I got you.
Yeah, she's acting. This acting.
Okay. Continue. Cut.
Cut.
End scene. That's pretty much it. I just feel like I don't know. It is what it is. They're crazy. There's a level of psychosis there for her. And I genuinely feel like they had justification in their minds because of their love. They felt that should overcome all. If you give Martha some grace, it's only because then you feel like Raymond is more of the monster and orchestrated a lot more of this. But even if you watch Lonely Hearts with Salma Hayek and you learn about the case, Martha had a lot of depravity to her. So I don't feel like you kind of have to take away some of the empathy for her with her love because, yeah, she is just kind of crazy.
I don't give her any sort of empathy. Aside from damaged human being deserves a little bit of empathy for the fact that they're a damaged human being. Everything beyond that is hard to empathize with. It's the 1940s. Who wants to be someone's kid who's thrown into a Salvation Army orphanage in the 1940s? I don't. There's lead paint there.
Okay.
That's fair.
I have empathy I grew up a fat kid. I know we're not allowed to use that word, but I'm referring to myself, so I'm okay using it.
I'm still a fat kid on the inside.
You never lose that mentality, and that's something that people that have never been overweight don't understand. It never goes away. You always see yourself no matter what you look like. And I grew up very much but I had to learn how to fight very, very young because of bullies and whatnot. So I have some empathy for that. But then you become the person you become and you make your choices, and she made hers, and they were all terrible. I do think it is an obsession situation. I think she finally found one guy who was willing to be with her through thick and thin, and she was willing to overlook everything. Now, in my mind, she's probably just as bad, if not worse, because she killed that child. And you lose all chance of humanity after that. And she obviously had a rage and a jealousy, and her quotes, if you look into more of her quotes, they will make you think that she's trying to get people to empathize with her, to understand her and everything else. And I just don't care a whole lot. I mean, you're trying to use the difficulty of your upbringing to excuse your behavior, and your behavior is far worse than anything you experienced. It's just weird. It's a horrible situation. And I guess I understand. I didn't understand the 40s. Like, this was a thing in the 40s. Apparently they would write love letters and send them off and wait for people to respond. And then you could basically marry someone by letter. And I guess, if you look at it now, there's tons of people that have done that from overseas and in prison and yada, yada, yada. So maybe I'm just thinking too new school.
And just because they wrote letters doesn't mean they didn't ever have some type of in-person or
phone call.
Maybe phone conversation.
Yeah, they had phones back then, Amanda. That's true.
I was questioning that. I was like, did they have phones? Let me just
they had
let me cover it in case
they had the big 12-digit whatever rotary thing where grandma had to get
Oh, that's right. Okay, that was in the 40s. Okay, cool.
They had
to
hold one piece of it up to one ear, and then they had to hold the other piece in the other hand to, or
and
was
if
that
you're in different states, there was like a tin can solution that
Yeah.
some states had where there was like a string tied to it, but that was a very long string and went state to state.
If you wanted to tweet something, you actually had to use a pigeon.
Yeah. Everybody had carrier pigeons back then. It was wild.
I kind of wish I could have one now.
Yeah, I just think they're terrible people. And it's very, very sad that they're such terrible people. And the worst part is they've killed more people than we reported on, allegedly. They just weren't convicted of it. And they were transferred so that they got the death penalty because they deserved to get the death penalty. And I guess there is some debate on that. Do you guys have strong feelings about death penalty one way or the other?
The only thing I have with this case in particular is that if they would have had them around a little bit longer and been able to use the information they can mine out of them to figure out if these other people that they're confessing to, even though there's no proof, if they can mine out more details to be able to point at and be like, okay, you really did do this. Cool. We can check this box off, other than whatever murder they're referring to being unsolved or like a family not having any answers. That's the thing that I worry about the most.
I'm not a fan of the death penalty. Even though the statistics are pretty low, I don't like the idea of executing someone who could potentially be innocent. And I think we have way too much of an impulsive society that leaps to extremism. And so I don't feel like our society is well apprised to be able to handle something like that, to be perfectly honest. I just don't trust America.
We can't be trusted with any of the nice things anymore.
We don't deserve
Pretty
to be
much.
trusted anymore. I mean, honestly, there are so many cases of innocent people that are cleared later by DNA evidence or something along those lines. I get it.
Even the non-executed ones, just general cases where people are just wrongly convicted.
And people get convicted in the court of public opinion all the time. Once you have all those pitchforks out, I think sometimes people think the death penalty is a solution and juries follow suit.
I hate the hypocrisy of it. Don't kill somebody or we're going to kill you. Eye for an eye. It's like, is this really adding any value? But at the same respect, I don't want to keep paying for somebody's life to be sustained through taxpayer dollars and a system that is not meant to rehabilitate or let anybody out. The intention is to just let them suffer. But they're not really suffering. They're living kind of a decent life.
I think if you got, 2 eyewitnesses and a DNA match, I'm okay with it. There we go.
Just hard and fast rule.
There's my hard and fast rule. 2 eyewitnesses and a DNA match. I'm good.
That's intense.
Lock it down.
Do you guys feel like one person is more responsible than the other in this?
Of these 2?
Yeah.
Oh, sure sounds like Martha was a firecracker, huh? Like she just would lose her shit and then someone would lose their life. So, but no, they're both there. They're both doing horrible things. They're both moving on to the next. So I think they're both culpable about equally. You?
Yeah, I lean towards them being equally culpable, although it feels like Raymond was a bit more, he had more longevity. She had more intensity. So she would be, like you said, very impulsive and just like, okay, let's take these people out. But he also wasn't opposed to it either. He was around watching, participating, or doing it by himself beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it got worse when she got into the picture and he saw how much she was willing to do. And I guarantee he manipulated the shit out of that. Because that was his intention from the very beginning, was to manipulate her.
I'm sure of that. Yeah. But he did seem to fall in love with her. He loved her for various reasons.
Yeah, but I know he was able to manipulate someone into doing something a bit more than what they probably originally were anticipating.
Possibly. Like I said, once you murder a child, nothing you can say can make me empathize with you anymore.
Especially murdering the child the way she did.
Is there any good way to do it? Answer carefully.
No, but there are ways that are worse than others.
More humane ways to be a murderer?
Look at the flowers.
Okay, that's fiction. I don't, I mean, I appreciate what you guys are saying. In some ways they're crueler than others. I just don't know if there's, in my mind, murder's murder. I don't care how you do it. It takes a despicable person to kill a child.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's arguing with you.
It is a final thing to do to somebody who hasn't even begun to live a life yet. It is terrible. It's monstrous. It should never be something that's reality, but it is.
Oh, look at John reading his lawyer's statement. Yeah, so, all things true. And man, I really wish that when you had like a couple, you could look at one and say, it's obviously that one, like they were abused, da da da. But it really feels like Martha almost chased him down to be part of this. I mean, honestly, if you watch the Honeymoon Killers, that seems more accurate in terms of what actually went down. Like,
she was a stalker for sure.
She absolutely stalked him. It wasn't so much like it wasn't. Okay. Are you guys ready to talk about the movies, or is there anything more about the actual case before we get into what's true, what's not true, da 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 in the movies?
Let's, you know what? Can we circle back around to this death penalty conversation as far as like what is cheaper, death penalty or life in prison? Having somebody serve out a life prison sentence is generally millions of dollars cheaper than a death penalty.
What?
How?
That math does not check out, sir. I don't care how many articles you've read.
The math is not mathing for me.
That math doesn't math at all. So they're going to be in prison for 40 years. That's somehow cheaper than putting them to death? I don't think so.
They're not like in prison a day or two and then zap. No, it doesn't happen. They're still.
Yeah, I understand that.
There could be another 20 years of legal battles trying, all the way up until the actual day it happens. So because of the court costs, the jurisdictional costs, the investigations, the constant reinvestigations that happen with death penalty cases, it's generally found that death penalty cases are more expensive. And then if you also factor in of the high chance that person could be legitimately innocent, there's the moral cost in that as well.
Okay. Look, there are some...
He's making a strong argument, to be fair.
There are some, based on that, yeah, sure. I could see that argument. I could also see the argument, if you got two eyewitnesses and a DNA match, let's just take them out to the yard and this problem's over. You know what I mean? $15.
We don't have to even wait for all the appeals or anything else.
Put that shit in my hand. If that money doesn't show that you owe me, yo.
Oh, yo.
That's the way that I'm going. I'm a firm believer that if you can confirm in two sources, it's just like reporting, just like journalism. You can confirm in two sources, which two eyewitnesses and a DNA match. Why are we wasting time?
All it takes is two people to like coerce together
with DNA match. That's two sources, two completely different sources. And two eyewitnesses.
Then you know what? I'm going to set up a lot of people hypothetically in this situation for murder because it seems real easy.
I like how you threw in the hypothetical. I didn't know everybody here had a lawyer for this podcast. I didn't know that was a new requirement. Everybody's like, oh yeah, I would totally do that. Hypothetically speaking, but I would never, because allegedly that would be horrible.
I would never build a revolving door right on the other side of the courtroom so that the person can go
what do you
right
think
through
about
the door
this?
directly into.
I plead to take the fifth. You're not under you have nothing to do with this case. Just in case. I plead the fifth.
Just in case.
Yeah. I'm not a constitutional lawyer, I don't know. I barely know a lot about the Constitution.
I passed it without studying, so I think that makes me an expert.
Right. I do think that there's a couple of different, like,
No.
I think they're called amendments that say that people are entitled, no matter what, to due process.
Oh yeah, that nonsense. Yeah, that's there. I'm not saying you don't have due process. I'm just saying I gave my opinion. My
Okay.
opinion of
All
what I would find acceptable in
All right.
cases of the death penalty. Yeah.
Wanted to remind everybody that there's this.
I never said take due process away. There's a lot of cases where people are like I always say, don't talk to cops. I firmly believe that. Don't talk to cops. Like John Benet Ramsey, that case we talked about a couple episodes ago. I understood the Ramseys completely because the lawyers are advising them don't talk to cops. Now going on CNN, stupid. That's a whole other story that we talked about on that episode. But I understand the concept of not talking to police officers.
Or we have talked,
Due
or we will
process
talk
matters.
about in another episode.
Due process is important. Absolutely.
No, absolutely. I just wanted to remind everybody before we start building up these electric slides right into the electric chair or gas chamber.
I wouldn't
Guilty,
do it that
and then
way.
zap. Before we start doing anything like that, there is an important piece of paper that people only seem to remember maybe one or two of those amendment things on that pretty clearly states due process.
I would actually go a step further and say maybe save some more money. Find a really deep well and we'll call it a wishing well. And when we confirm by these, multiple witnesses, DNA match, and maybe, and they killed someone under 60. Maybe I just really don't like child murderers specifically. Maybe then they just get pitched into this well. And, what happens. They're on their own at that point. Then
Sounds
you leave
like
it
a
up to fate.
stinky area. Can we put that in like Missouri or something?
Well, that's really mean to anybody who's listening to Missouri, but
Well,
yeah,
don't
sure.
they have a lot of open
Sure.
space? Wyoming, is that better?
Find the most disgusting place you can find that's not named so we don't offend someone.
Pretty sure Colorado has like that secret alien base
Yeah, it's called
underneath the
Denver.
airport.
Oh, yeah, we do have that too.
Secret.
I thought you were going to go with Colorado having something disgusting.
Oh my God, that's funny. All right, let's switch over to the movies because we're just being ridiculous at this point. So there's two movies that we're talking about, right? And we'll talk about the first one first. That is 1970s The Honeymoon Killers, about an embittered nurse who doesn't mind if her toupee-wearing boyfriend romances and fleeces other women as long as he takes her along on his con jobs. And eventually, obviously, it leads to murder. It was written and directed by Leonard Kastle and starred Shirley Stoller and Tony LaBianco as Martha Beck and Ray Fernandez. So, fun facts just on that movie. Originally, it was to be directed by Martin Scorsese. Haha. But he was replaced after a week of shooting due to creative differences by Donald Volkman, who was subsequently replaced by Leonard Kastle. A lot of people shifting chairs on this movie. Scorsese was fired because he was filming every scene in master shots and not shooting close-ups or other coverage, making the film impossible to edit. And according to Castle's interview with the Criterion Collection, the ultimate moment that caused Scorsese's firing was trying to get a close-up on a beer can lit perfectly for the intended tone.
What?
Yeah. Oh. No,
Big picture here, Scorsese, okay?
This is cinema.
If that beer can had an Iron Man logo on it, he'd know what to do with it.
Also, there's a New York City art noise rock band called the Honeymoon Killers. They took their name from this movie. So that movie in particular, I will say, of the two films, is closer to what really happened. Like, the story is very close to fact. Not too much is off, except for, I believe it's a boy that gets killed in the movie as opposed to a little girl. But otherwise, it's quite similar. They actually follow a lot of it very closely. The thing is, number one, it's a dated movie. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
It's dated. It's too long.
Okay.
It's drawn out.
Take your moment, Amanda. What did you think of Honeymoon
Sorry.
Killers?
Nope, that's about it. That summarizes it.
It was a hard watch. I don't have a lot of trouble watching stuff. This one was hard. Not because of anything that was happening in it. It failed to capture for me the reason why I should be watching this movie beyond it was a homework assignment.
I had a hard time at the beginning. I did think the first probably 15, 20 minutes were a little rough. Once it got going, I found it to be a very intriguing film to watch. Like, there are several moments that I thought were extremely unnerving, is the word I would use. And I think that's important in a case like this. Like, I watched the Lonely Hearts movie. We'll talk about that more directly. I didn't feel one way or another watching that, except I think Salma Hayek did a very good job, and not just because I think she's gorgeous. I think she's very talented as well, and I think she shined in that movie. But we'll come back to that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that this had several situations where I really felt like maybe they understood Martha Beck better than most and seemed to really bring that across in her portrayal. And the murders that happened just kind of really caught me off guard and made me uncomfortable, more so than anything in the other film. And I think at least that deserves to be commended. I do think it's a hard watch. I don't think it's a great movie. I don't agree with Francois Truffaut that I can't disagree. It's his favorite American film, but I can disagree that it should be. So I'm with you in terms of that film.
The thing that stood out to me the most about the whole Martha Beck portrayal was exactly how she was just a looming presence over everything that had to do with the killings, with him, everything, with Raymond, like everything. Like she was always this looming presence, just like you're watching everything from her point of view. You're sitting with her to a level of uncomfortability, and I think you're very right with the idea that it really does portray the kind of turmoil that she must be living with on a regular basis because of mental health or whatever the reason is. Jealousy, mental health, whether it's the fact that she's, I don't know, forced to be his sister and watch him do funny things to other people. All those things kind of do transfer from film to you quickly.
One thing I didn't understand from either film is both of them portray Raymond Fernandez as kind of an unwilling participant in many respects. Like it's almost like his hand is forced. Where if you go look at the real individual, he was kind of braggadocious about all of this. He was very proud of his work, that he was this successful con man who murdered people and got away with it for so long. And then he loved Martha. Those things were very prominent in him after the fact, after he was caught and before he was executed. I feel like both movies missed that. Okay, so let's move on to Lonely Hearts, which is based on the true story. Again, it's about two homicide detectives who track Martha Beck and Raymond Martinez Hernandez, a murderous pair known as the Lonely Hearts Killers, who lured their victims through their personals, written and directed by Todd Robinson, who was the grandson of Elmer Robinson, fun fact, starring Jared Leto and Salma Hayek as Ray Fernandez and Martha Beck, and also starring John Travolta, James Gandolfini, Scott Caan, Laura Dern. What a freaking cast. I have to point this out before we get into anything because it's driving me freaking mad. Raymond Martinez Fernandez is very much a Hispanic man. He's played by Jared Leto. There's no Hispanic in Jared Leto. He's white. You've got Martha Beck, overweight white woman. None of these things comes close to Salma Hayek.
They said, let's flip-flop these.
They said, let's take the true story and not do it. Not do it at all. We've got blowjobs of cops that there's no confirmation that ever happened.
Let her be a wild woman, okay?
There's a murder of a cop that there's no confirmation that happened. What the frack? I just don't. In this world of wokeism is everywhere, I think it's fascinating that you took the Hispanic guy and made him a very white dude, and took the white lady and made her a very Hispanic.
It's
gorgeous
also not
woman.
that they didn't just swap the races of these actors and characters. They still tried to make Jared Leto look Hispanic.
Did they?
Kind of.
I think the mustache was them trying to go for like a Spanish vibe.
I think they were trying. Yeah, I do.
A Spanish Latin dude.
He very much had a Spanish name. They didn't change his name to something like Raymond Smith
Johnson.
Something. They didn't do that. So I think they were trying to make it seem like, oh yeah, he's kind of Hispanic. And just for anyone that's wondering, no, there's no Hispanic in Jared Leto. He's
also Salma Hayek was an excellent choice, regardless of her not matching the real Martha
at all.
Excellent choice.
Yeah, I that's the one thing I want to say. It bums me out that I actually like this movie less than I like The Honeymoon Killers.
I like it more.
By the way. Okay, fair enough. We'll get to your take in a minute.
I actually liked watching this one.
Hang on a minute. We got your take. Let me give you mine. I think this is a world of bad acting from John Travolta. He's phoning it in like there's no tomorrow.
Oh, yeah. The wig he's wearing is doing more work than him.
I love James Gandolfini and Scott Caan and their rapport. I think that's great.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think Salma Hayek is giving one of her best performances, and no one's going to notice because nobody saw this movie when it came out.
Mm-hmm.
She's great.
Or
She's
will
absolutely
ever.
great. Yeah.
But she was fantastic.
Fantastic. Okay, why did you like it more, Amanda, other than the fact that it's not in black and white?
I don't mind black and white. It's just that it was entertaining. I didn't need a docuseries for a fictional type movie. You know what I mean? Like, I want to enjoy it at the same time as like understanding these characters. And I don't mind when they take some level of liberties to make it more entertaining. Because I think ultimately they still captured who these two people were as these characters. Now, there's some things that, yeah, they could have improved. It could have been better. But overall, I feel like it was a decent flick. Like, I enjoyed watching it. You mentioned how great Salma Hayek was. And she was a scene stealer. It's hard not to like that movie with how much she could suck you in. And it made her seem like she was more of, like she really was obsessed with him.
Yeah,
and
but
you finally get that.
But that's the thing that I think is missing, because Martha Beck she was like 250 pounds, and that was a part of who she was. Now, I'm not saying,
sure,
Salma Hayek should have put on weight or something. I'm just saying her anger and jealousy comes across more as jealous Hispanic woman. I know because I'm married to one. It comes across more as that than it is the Martha Beck situation, which was a low self-esteem, because there's no way Salma Hayek has low self-esteem. And they even put blue contacts on her because Martha Beck had blue eyes. But you don't care about anything else to do with Martha, so why did that matter? It's a ridiculous... I thought the movie was poorly constructed.
Well, I mean, I'll give you that for sure.
No, this movie was definitely problematic. I enjoyed it a lot more than the original. I said this before. I'm going to say it now in game as opposed to just through chat. But James Gandolfini and Scott Caan are in one movie, and everybody else are in a different movie. And that breaks my heart, because the movie that those two people are making is great. The movie that everybody else is making is okay at best. You've got Jared Leto trying his hardest with a wig and with.
I don't think he's very good.
Well, I mean, I said he's trying his hardest. I didn't say he's good. He's sucked for a long time.
I'm not a fan of Jared Leto as an actor.
I get it. You got everybody else who's doing either middling or phoning it in, with the exception of Salma Hayek, but they all are in one movie. But Scott Caan and James Gandolfini, those two are just chewing on every bit of scenery they possibly can, and it gets even better when they're together. I want more of that movie. Yeah,
very much. It does come across very much like Todd Robinson is trying to tell us a story about his father and what this case did to his grandfather and his father's relationship and how it affected him and changed, why he got out of law enforcement and everything else. And I totally understand that. But if you're taking a very true to life case, I would think being true to the facts would be more important than what is transpiring here, because you're very much trying to recreate your grandfather's, eventual involvement in the Lonely Hearts killings, while not really getting a lot of it right. There's a lot of stuff that's incorrect here. It is what it is in that respect. I will mention one quote that his grandson, Todd Robinson, the director of this film, said was, "What the movie is really about is how this case changed my grandfather's life and forced him to consider why his own wife had taken her life," because his wife had committed suicide, as presented in the film. The quote in regards to his grandfather and his wife taking her life, that's a movie that, sure, I understand why he would want to make that. I just don't think you really found a good enough connection here. And the film suffers. You've got a great cast, and
I would agree with that too.
It should be a much better film. It just should. Another fun fact, on her execution day, Martha Beck, it was discovered that she would not fit into the electric chair, so she was seated on the armrests when the fatal shock was administered, just to give you an indication of how
oh my goodness
overweight she was. That's how, now see, that's where you start going, okay, that's where somebody needs to stop and say, now we're just being cruel.
Seriously.
That's wild, because those chairs aren't small.
That's why we need a wishing well. Just saying.
Shit. Wishing well. Let's throw another body in the wishing well.
I will tell you that Jared Leto did shave the front of his head in that bald patch to get the effect of the real Raymond. He even stated that he plucked his hair on his head to add to the regimen of shaving. Look, Jared Leto's never met a method he couldn't try to engage in. It doesn't improve the performance here.
But why?
Yeah, there's great bald caps out there. There's great toupees out there. John Travolta's been wearing one for 20 years.
Except for the one he's wearing in this.
Not great.
I don't know if it's just the fact that he's always been wearing bad toupees, or if it's more so the fact that everyone's wearing a bad toupee, so it just makes his toupee stand out even more.
It's very possible. Sure, it's very possible. It's a tricky movie. I just don't find it to be a good film, where I do think The Honeymoon Killers is consistent as a film. From start to finish, it knows what it wants to be, and it does that. Whether you like it or you don't, that's up to you. I actually liked it when it was over. I don't love it. I don't think it's great. I do think it's much better than this movie. Lonely Hearts to me is a very terrible, forgotten, generic film that is never going to be remembered in the future. It just won't.
That is definitely the disappointing part of it, is that the movie itself is something that we were all surprised existed.
We didn't know it existed until we were doing I, Tonya. We were getting ready to record this episode shortly after, and then realized, wait, there's another movie? We should probably watch that before we do this one. And that's what we did. Now I just wish we would have recorded it at the time and saved some effort. The movie, we talked about what I got right and did it respect the victim. What I got wrong and left out, I will tell you, there's no proof that Martha ever blew a cop. And I'm sorry to put it in such harsh, direct terms, but that's what it is. She elicits oral sex to try to get out of a ticket. And then later that same cop is instrumental in that. There's no proof that happened. There's no proof of a murder of a cop. There's a couple things that just are here that I don't know why they put them in there other than for dramatic effect. That's in Lonely Hearts. And Honeymoon Killers, other than it's a boy versus a girl, most of that is actually fairly accurate. It's really not off the rails too much.
Going back to Lonely Heart Killers, which weirdly does the scene better than the more updated movie. I remember when you were watching it and you sent the message going, that was pretty terrifying. And I knew exactly what scene it was, which was the kill with the hammer.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that when they tried to repeat it in the movie, in Lonely Hearts, it just didn't have the same impact somehow.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a little unnerving in both scenes. In the Lonely Hearts, what is it? It's done while the lovemaking is occurring, right?
Yes.
And it is definitely a little bit of a nerving moment when she's kind of twitching on the floor next to her after she makes him finish himself off. And I get that they're trying to illustrate the sexual deviancy. I don't have a problem with that. But for whatever reason, that in the original Honeymoon Killers, it was such a disturbing scene. I thought that was one of the few times I've watched a movie where I felt like I was in the victim's shoes. And I think it did a very good job of placing me in that room, just witnessing horror unfold, because it felt very genuine and less orchestrated, if you will, less shock cinema.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of Lonely Hearts was to try and elicit and create very dramatized moments.
Oh yeah, for sure. So, did the movie respect the victims? I think both did what they could. I mean, I don't really care if Martha and Raymond didn't get their fair share. They don't deserve anything, but the victims, I think, deserved a better face on both movies. I don't think, other than Delphine in either film, I don't think any of the characters really get any of the victims get a real face. They're more of just things that happen along this path. So I would have focused more on the victims and told them more from the victims' standpoint of what it's like to have your life completely ripped from you. I would actually, in terms of what would I have done differently, which is how we always close these kind of episodes, I would have personally started with one of these relationships and then kind of start from the victim's perspective so we get to know her and this person that comes into her life and then cons her out of her money, and then we follow them from that point forward so that we we get the feeling of what that means, what that feels like to be swindled like that. Have your heart crushed, your money taken, left with nothing. I just think that would be a good way to illustrate how horrible these people were.
Yeah, I would like to see it much in the same way. Kind of like a Jaws movie, though, where it's primarily focused on the victim, and you barely see the other two until the very moment it's time to switch the storytelling over to being the whodunit. Well, not the whodunit, but the cat and mouse with the cops and them. But seeing a good maybe 20 to 30 minutes of like this whole Jaws series of events where you're watching this woman or whoever, their life falling apart as they're dealing with like, I don't understand this, what's going on with this, he wants this, what's going on here, but I really love him. And seeing all of that slowly boil down into a final outcome that then hands over everything to the main characters, that would be very interesting.
I think the biggest thing that would have been beneficial to incorporate into especially like a more modernized film is what Aaron referenced around Martha's insecurities and her self-esteem. I think that if we're trying to give a true representation of who those individuals were and how they got to where they were, then, and we're trying to incorporate, I guess, like their origin story, I think it's important that we understand the impact and ramifications that some of that stuff does have to some extent, and that it's depicted in a way that doesn't excuse her behavior, but it just gives insight into why maybe at least her jealousy was so extreme and why she clung to him so much.
Sure.
But I don't feel like we also ever really, really understood why he was so drawn to her. There's not, it's just that they're infatuated and love each other.
Yeah, they don't do a very good job. I mean, I feel like Honeymoon Killers is kind of gets close to it with she kept showing up and he just got to a point where she was part of his life and didn't know how to get rid of her, so to speak. Lonely Hearts makes it feel like he does want to part ways. He just doesn't know how. It kind of makes him seem almost victimish, which I didn't like at all.
Yeah, and the reality is, you know, at the end of his days, he's still remarking about how much he loves her.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think that came across. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that I think that I would have really liked to better have seen and also specifically understood.
Crazy times. But that's going to do it for this episode. We are done with this one. So if you have enjoyed the podcast on this one or any other episode, please share the show on our social media outlets. Give us a review in your favorite podcast app. You can email us, inspired@thehollywoodoutsiders.com, with your thoughts on the episode or requests if you want, and we'll look into those. We're always looking for movies with true crime or inspired by true crime events. It doesn't always have to be crime though. Like we're open to doing other stuff. So keep that in mind. You know, maybe we'll do Titanic and we'll let you know how Jack could have fit on that goddamn door. But until then, you are the best source of promotion. So please tell your true crime friends about us. We really do appreciate it. Thank you for listening to Inspired by a True Story. Now let's keep those artists honest. Martha wouldn't have let Raymond drown in that cold, bitter ocean, just so you know.
No, because she wouldn't fit on the door.
She would have. Oh my gosh.